Here's what's coming up on the program today. U.S. President Joe Biden warns Russia against invading Ukraine. The first foreign aid planes arrive in Tonga bearing the much-needed supplies. Plus, at least 29 people are killed in a stampede at a church gathering in Liberia. A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. We begin with U.S. President Joe Biden warning Russia it will pay a serious and dear price for invading Ukraine. This after he said he thinks the former, that's Russia, will move in on Ukraine, but does not want a full-blown war. Russia has amassed about 100,000 troops near the border with Ukraine, but denies it has plans to invade the country. The Kremlin has warned the comments could further destabilize the situation there.
The United States President's remarks were made at the White House just before his first anniversary in office. He predicted that Russian President Vladimir Putin will make a move into Ukraine and said that Russia would pay dearly for a fully scaled invasion, with its business possibly losing access to the U.S. dollar.
I think he still does not want any full-blown war, number one. Number two, do I think he'll test the West, test the United States and NATO as significantly as he can? Yes, I think he will. But I think he'll pay a serious and dear price for it that he doesn't think now will cost him what it's going to cost him.
President Biden told reporters he believed President Putin will test Western leaders and that the response to any Russian invasion will depend on the scale of Moscow's actions and whether U.S. allies squabble over how to react. President Biden also predicts the situation in Ukraine could very easily get out of hand.
What I'm concerned about is this could get out of hand, very easily get out of hand because of what you said, the borders of Ukraine and what Russia may or may not do.
In the meantime, U.S. top diplomats today arrived in Berlin for talks with allies in a diplomatic push to diffuse tensions with Moscow over Ukraine. Blinken, who vowed on Wednesday that Washington would pursue diplomacy as long as it could, began talks with Germany, France and Britain before going to Geneva to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Friday. European Commission President today said that the EU will respond with massive economic and financial sanctions in case of further attacks against Ukraine.
If the situation deteriorates, if there are any further attacks on the territorial integrity of Ukraine, we will respond with massive economic and financial sanctions. The transatlantic community stands firm on this. The European Union is by far Russia's biggest trading partner and by far the largest investor.
On Wednesday night, President Volodymyr Zelensky, in a nationwide broadcast, called on Ukrainians not to panic. He said Ukraine wants its partners to be more specific in their reaction to war threats. While Russia denies it has plans to invade Ukraine, a Russian submarine test-fired a Caliber cruise missile against a land-based target from the Sea of Japan. Earlier today, news agencies report that Russia's Navy will conduct a series of military drills this month and next in the Mediterranean seas and the Northern Atlantic Ocean as well as the Pacific Ocean.
Well, this is all happening as the U.S. President Joe Biden marks 1 year, in office. Foreign Affairs analyst Calvin Dark joins us now from Washington. Calvin, great to see you in 2022. Global events are overshadowing President Biden's anniversary today. The crisis in Ukraine, the voting bill in Congress, former President Donald Trump's documents, an inquiry into the January 6th riots at the Capitol. Does America even remember a new president was sworn in today a year ago?
Yes, we certainly do, but it's a little bit different. It's not quite celebratory. And what I mean by that is that we're very much aware that Biden has been in office for a year. And seeing, for example, the images from a year ago today is making a lot of Americans think back to, okay, what has changed? What has improved? What's worse? What are things like now that and how does that compare to how we thought they would be a year ago? So we're recognizing the year, but it's a lot more evaluation and less celebration.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what would Americans then consider to be the gains of the Biden administration 1 year on?
Well, to be blunt, I think that the Biden administration's biggest accomplishment is that they are not the Trump administration. And for a lot of Americans, myself included, that was a welcome relief. However, that can only be your biggest accomplishment for so long. And I think that's the perception a lot of Americans have. Now, being objective, because it's kind of hard to see it objectively when you're living it, the Biden administration has done some pretty remarkable things. Relief during the pandemic for COVID, an infrastructure plan, some other measures that, even if they haven't come into place yet, at least reaffirmed what the U.S. stands for here and abroad. But the Biden administration has got to build on that because they can't just be the non-Trump administration for the next 3 years.
We're coming to the most pressing issue for American foreign affairs, the crisis in Ukraine and the so-called impending invasion by Russia. We've seen this before, Russia's denial of a planned invasion. It's doing nothing anyway to allay fears of Western leaders because of previous experiences. Do you think an attack by Russia on Ukraine is inevitable, or is this just war rhetoric on the part of Russia?
I think the answer is somewhere in between. With any other world leader, I might lean more towards rhetoric, but we've known Putin to do this before. And what's even more interesting is the last time he did it was in the administration where Joe Biden was vice president. So I think that the world, especially the Ukrainians, and here in the United States, we realize that while a lot may be rhetoric, there's a real threat behind it. And what Biden obviously needs to do is to see what is the appetite for us to get involved and how involved we should be if this turns more from rhetoric to actual action.
And he does seem to be quite involved and quite invested with the comments he made yesterday. Apparently, both sides, Ukraine and Russia, are stockpiling weapons, strengthening defenses for Ukraine, depending on NATO for defense and the EU for diplomacy. What happens if allies decide to stand down preparations and then believe Russia when it says it has no intentions of invading Ukraine?
Well, I think that at a minimum, that will make things in Ukraine and some of the other former Soviet republics very tense. It's going to definitely affect the level of stability that they're dealing with their own domestic problems. It's also going to bring into question the supremacy of NATO and Western powers when it comes to kind of setting the world stage as far as power goes. And so I definitely know that from the European point of view and the United States point of view, they want to stand down, hoping that Putin will stand down. But if Putin doesn't stand down and the U.S. and the European powers don't at least make it known what exactly they'll do, it'll only increase tension and instability.
Calvin, thanks again for joining us, and thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Staying with the United States, the Supreme Court has rejected former President Donald Trump's request to block the release of White House records sought by the Democratic-led congressional panel investigating last year's deadly riots at the Capitol by a mob of his supporters. The court's decision now means that the documents can be disclosed even as litigation over the matter continues in lower courts. Trump and his allies have repeatedly tried to block efforts by the January 6th House committees investigating the riots to access witnesses and documents. The former president had requested the court to block the release of the records. His request came after the U.S. Appeals Court's Washington, D.C. circuit ruled that he had no basis to challenge President Biden's decision to allow the handing over of his records. We had reported 8 flights lifting off different countries yesterday, headed for the Pacific island of Tonga. First to arrive today was the one from New Zealand. The airport runway in Tonga had to be cleared of ash before the plane was allowed to land. Pictures were seen of a Royal New Zealand Air Force C-130 Hercules on the tarmac at Fuamotu International Airport.
The first planes carrying aid have reached Tonga, 5 days after the island nation was hit by a volcanic eruption and tsunami. Australian and New Zealand aircraft touched down with water treatment gear, shelter, kitchens, and a sweeper to help remove ash from the airport. The delivery of the supplies was contactless to ensure Tonga remains free of the coronavirus. Japan and China have also sent emergency relief supplies. Over 100,000 people have been cut off from the rest of the world for days. The disaster severed an undersea telecoms cable that was one of the few links to the outside. Footage has emerged of the aftermath showing ash-covered debris and trees torn from their roots.
There's a fine layer of a blanket of ash everywhere, and I hear that the public are generally out on the streets trying to clean it up. So there's a real communal effort to try and clean everything up, and it's going to be a long road to recovery. Other things are affected. Food source with the plantations. Farmers are trying to make their plants survive the volcanic eruption.
The Tonga Hapai volcano erupted on Saturday, sending tsunami waves rolling across the archipelago that killed at least 3 people and destroyed villages, resorts, buildings, and knocked out communication for the nation of about 105,000 people.
Here in Africa, families are anxiously waiting news about loved ones who could have been at the Christian Crusade in a densely populated area of the Liberian capital, Monrovia. A stampede occurred Wednesday night when a group of gangsters, some carrying knives, moved on the open air ground and attacked worshippers. 29 people died in the tragedy. Bodies recovered have been taken to the morgue at Redemption Hospital close to the Crusade ground. Much earlier today, President George Weah visited the hospital. He's declared 3 days of mourning and ordered an investigation. Details about the event is still sketchy, but it is clear the gang's activities caused a stampede. Earlier, my colleague Teniola Shibawale spoke with Liberian journalist Evelyn Seeger, who reported on how far investigations have gone.
The police or the authority of law enforcement, they are still investigating, and they are hopeful that the investigation will lead them to getting other that are connected or other gang masters that are connected with this crime. But for now, there hasn't been any clear-cut, information. Maybe as time goes by, there might be other updates coming up in trace of other gang members. But for now, the police is still doing this work, is still investigating who are those connected with the attack of the worshippers. The government has raided several gangs, spots, some of those hotspots across the cities. The past months, there were a real exchange of guns and fires attacks with the police authorities, the emergency response unit, we call the PSU, the police response unit, with some of these gangsters where some people died in the process. But it's really been on the increase, the wave of, these guys moving in communities, hijacking communities and robbing. The police, have raided several ghettos. They've raided several hotspots, but yet still it's really not made so much significant progress. But it is a serious challenge.
Well, staying with religious activities, but to former Pope Benedict XVI, he has been accused of failing to take action against clerics in 4 cases of alleged sexual abuse in his archdiocese when he was Archbishop of Munich. A report by Munich law firm Westphal Spiker has found compounding a scandal engulfed in the Catholic Church. The former Pope Benedict, has previously denied wrongdoing over the cases. The law firm was asked in 2020 to investigate allegations of sexual abuse in the archdiocese and between the years 1945 and 2019. This report commissioned by the archdiocese said there were at least 497 victims of abuse, mainly young males. Many other cases had probably not been reported, according to the lawyers. It also found fault with the current Archbishop of Munich, Cardinal Reinhard Max, in 2 suspected cases. We have more stories coming up on The World Today Plus. While many parts of the world enjoy snow, it's not a common sight in Syria's Damascus. So citizens came out to enjoy. Stay with us. Welcome back, and time now for our review of the coronavirus pandemic, which begins in Russia today, where a spike in cases has been reported. Here's a global update.
The Russian capital reported a record pandemic high of 11,557 new COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours. Authorities say that the daily nationwide number of new infections also rose sharply to 38,850. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has announced that restrictions will be tightened across the country if there is a community transmission of the Omicron variant of the coronavirus, but rules out any lockdowns. Speaking at a news conference, the Prime Minister says the country will move into a red traffic light setting within 24 to 48 hours of Omicron arriving in the community.
Once Omicron arrives, though, we will need to step up further. That's why I'm confirming today that when Omicron enters into the community, beyond border-related cases, the whole country will move into red within 24 to 48 hours. We know from other countries that Omicron can take as little as 14 days for cases to grow from the hundreds into the thousands across the country. It is important to remember, though, that red does not mean lockdowns or regional boundaries, and business remains open. What it does mean is immediately increasing our use of masks, changing the way we interact in hospitality, and reducing gathering sizes in order to slow Omicron down.
A leading disease expert says the Omicron variant, which is spreading far faster than previous versions of the coronavirus, is not likely to help countries achieve so-called herd immunity against COVID-19.
So usually when we talk about reaching herd immunity, we mean reaching the herd immunity threshold. But herd immunity itself is that buildup of immunity in a population. And even when we haven't reached the full herd immunity threshold, we still get benefits from that herd immunity, which is that transmission will begin to slow down as more and more people are immune. And I think what makes this concept really messy, particularly right now for the Omicron variant of COVID, is that even if people have been vaccinated or previously infected, they may not be fully protected in terms of unable to get infected and transmit to others. And so that's why it's really hard to establish how close we are to herd immunity right now, because we don't know how susceptible people are.
From the earliest days of the pandemic, public health officials have expressed hope that it was possible to achieve herd immunity against COVID-19 as long as a high enough percentage of people were vaccinated or infected with the virus. Austria's conservative-led government says it's introducing a national lottery to encourage citizens to get vaccinated against the virus. The announcement came hours before Parliament was due to pass a bill introducing a national vaccine mandate. Roughly 72% of Austria's population is fully vaccinated against COVID-19, one of the lowest rates in Western Europe. New daily infections surged to a new record on Wednesday as the extremely contagious Omicron variant spread further, but the government wants to avoid a further national lockdown since the country emerged from its fourth one only last month.
Tennis superstar Novak Djokovic has been spotted walking down the promenade in Tivat, Montenegro today. He was busy taking pictures with fans following his deportation from Australia on Sunday. Earlier today, the Australian court that dismissed the player's challenge to his visa cancellation argued the minister, as a Minister of Immigration in Australia, made the rational decision because Djokovic posed a risk. Djokovic's saga has fueled global debate over the rights of people who opt not to get vaccinated. His stay in Australia was an 11-day roller coaster involving 2 visa cancellations, 2 court challenges, and a total of 5 nights at an immigration detention hotel. His lawyers argued that Immigration Minister Alex Hawke's decision was irrational. He lacked evidence that Djokovic's presence in Australia may stoke anti-vaccination sentiment and had failed to consider that deporting Djokovic might inflame anti-vax feelings. The federal court said Hawke is allowed to cancel a visa as long as he is satisfied the holder may be a risk to the health or good order of the Australian community. Politics now in the UK. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, says no one is above the law, encouraging lawmakers to speak to him after a senior Conservative lawmaker accused the British government of intimidation. William Ragg, chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, which oversees constitutional issues and standards, accused the government of using blackmail tactics on those lawmakers they suspect of wanting to force the Prime Minister out of power after growing calls for him to step down over a series of scandals, including admitting he had attended a party at his Downing Street office at a time when Britain was under strict COVID-19 lockdown. Hoyle said an investigation into blackmail would be a matter for the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, adding that it would be a contempt to obstruct MPs in doing their duties.
In recent days, a number of members of Parliament have faced pressures and intimidation from members of the government because of their declared or assumed desire for a vote of confidence in the party leadership of the Prime Minister. It is, of course, the duty of the Government Whip's office to secure the government's business in the House of Commons. However, it is not their function to breach the ministerial code in threatening to withdraw investments from members of Parliament's constituencies which are funded from the public purse.
Colleagues, remember when Lord Geit came.
العراق كل الحب لسوريا، عراس العراق وعراس بغداد وفلوجة وكل المحافظات العراقية.
Yeah, some parts of the world are used to scenes like this, but not in Damascus, in Syria. This is a real rarity for citizens there. Many were busy building snowmen and taking part in snowball fights. After a cold snap brought a rare snowstorm to Damascus early today, according to those videos we're seeing from social media. The snowstorm hit Syria, Lebanon and Jordan on Wednesday and is expected to last for 2 to 3 days. By the scenes of revelry in Damascus, Syria is experiencing fuel shortages and blackouts. I'm sure that this probably helps them get over some of those issues. Probably need to work on their snowmanship, making a snowman out of very little snow. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi.